Hello everybody, how you doing? Thanks for coming along this morning. So my name is Carl, I'm co-founder of StoryTagger, and very quickly, StoryTagger is a mobile video platform that enables your employees, colleagues to create fantastic learning content using frameworks that you provide them, meaning that you don't have to invest in expensive video teams, and you can kind of put video into parts of your learning programs that video hasn't really existed in before. And today we're going to look at, if my clicker works. Oh, it's not going to. Oh, here we go. 10 work challenges that you can solve with user-generated video. Before we start, I just wanted to get a show of hands to who's using video much in learning programs at the moment. Awesome, that's probably about 50% of you. And when are you finding any kind of challenges with making? What's the biggest challenge that you face with creating video at the moment? Does anyone want to shout out anything that's kind of getting in the way of making video? Just give
If it's peer generated, then the quality of what they send in.
and what's the issue with the quality on peer generated?
People doing stuff on their phone, sending it in, and it's all over the place.
It's all over the place. Excellent. Yes, absolutely. People making their own content and it's all over the place. What about any other sort of video challenges?
Compliance won't let us because they're really nervous about somebody recording that something that legal would be worried about.
Okay, excellent. So that's people talking about things they shouldn't be talking about when making video. The file size, yeah, absolutely. Sharing video is really difficult, and I think a lot of these are challenges that we tried to solve with StoryTagger, and making people talk about stuff you want them to talk about rather than going off topic, making people create short content that other people will want to watch, being able to be really agile with it, being cost effective so it's not really expensive, and being something that's accessible to people to create. So we've kind of made it really easy, and some people say fun, to record learning videos. But as we all know, it's sort of like one thing having a technology in place that answers a sort of tactical problem, but you really need to build a business case to actually put that technology into your organization. So today, what we wanted to talk about, and through sort of client stories and things that customers have told us, 10 work challenges that you can actually bring user-generated video into your organization that solves. And some of these will be stuff that you're probably doing at the moment with traditional video crews, and other things, because you're putting video into more of a self-service guided structure, will be things where you've not really been able to use video before. So I'm going to kick off. I think this has got a bit of a lag to it just to make me, or I have to point it at my computer. Or I just press the space bar. I'm going to give up on that now. So the first one is learning beyond the classroom. And I speak to a lot of facilitators and trainers, and the 5 kind of main challenges that they tell me they're looking to solve are sort of sharing the value of the programs that they run, building early engagement with cohorts, supporting that reflective process, demonstrating learning transfer back into the workplace, and evidencing the impact of their programs. And the way teams are using StoryTagger within their existing classroom environments is typically starting off with getting people to do personal introductions. So that will be the facilitator or the trainer introducing themselves and the the value and the outputs of the program they're running, but then also getting the cohort to introduce themselves, because typically within large organizations you get a bunch of people coming from 4 corners of the world sometimes, or the country, and they haven't got a clue who each other are. And to avoid that awkward kind of bit at the beginning of a session where everyone's just looking at their phones and not talking to each other, creating those personal introductions, talking about challenges, getting people to open up about the challenges they're facing, what their expectations are from the program, means that when everyone's landed in the classroom, it's got a more buzzy atmosphere. It's a really good environment for the facilitator, the trainer, to start teaching in, because everyone understands where they're from, the challenges, and it's a really good starting point. And also that gets people into the idea of using video as a way of talking about stuff and sharing knowledge and experience with each other. And that means when we move into kind of learning logs or learning reflection, it's a bit easier for people to actually talk about what they've taken out of the session and contextualizing it to their own work experiences, which means that you can have 25 people in a classroom environment. They'll all go away, talk about what they've learned in that session through the lens of their own job. That can then get shared with a cohort after the classroom, and it kind of amplifies the learning that people get out of that session. And then moving into the learning transfer stage, getting people to provide feedback on the programs, talking about how they are embedding what they've learned from the classroom into the workplace, and again sharing that with the cohort. And it kind of builds up that sort of social peer-to-peer based learning environment where people are talking about their own experience but in a way that supports others. And so teams who are using it at the moment, we've got Hemsley Fraser are using it as part of a leadership program, and as well as these things, they're helping people practice as well. So the act of, communication is a really important part of leadership, and I'll talk about this in a bit. So getting people better at speaking on camera and understanding how they present themselves. And we've also had Dentsu Aegis, a big global marketing agency, who've been using it for a global leadership team, people flying into London from across the world, never met each other before, hit the ground running by all introducing themselves to each other, talking about their different areas of where they work, and sort of having that shared experience before they land in the workshop environment. So that's learning beyond the classroom. Second, embedding culture change. So we know that culture change has to come from the bottom up and not the top down. And, you really need to bring people along in this journey. And video is a really great way of amplifying the stories of people who are already doing this stuff well. And having those authentic, relatable stories shared amongst colleagues is a much more powerful way of embedding a culture change than having that sort of top-down approach where people are being told what to do. And it's actually one of the areas where we started getting the idea for StoryTagger was around the culture change piece, where we were going out with a film crew, and it was costing a fortune to go and get these basically talking head videos. And even working for a really large organization, the cost of that is just too expensive for most learning and development teams, but the impact is massive. So being able to support people in doing that in a self-service manner was, I'd say, one of the things that really inspired us to think about how we could build a platform to support that. Attracting and retaining top talent. So we've read the Burson reports, all the other reports that talk about how it's so important for people to understand the breadth and depth of learning opportunities, development opportunities in their own organizations. People really value learning and developing their careers within the way they look at their jobs, but a lot of people don't realize the fantastic resources that are available to them. So career stories are a really good way of showing how other people in an organization have taken advantage of those services and opportunities to develop their own careers. And there's such a huge range of ways that people can do that, from mentoring to taking part in different sort of organizations within the kind of structure of the business. And we do see a lot of career stories, and the ones that I often see are sort of text and pictures, so like an editorial style. And you know, I don't really feel, having seen video career stories compared to the text-based ones, I don't really think they bring that experience to life, because actually seeing someone talk with the passion and energy about their own career, and also talking about the struggle they've gone through to actually reach the goal that they set themselves, you get a much more honest and authentic appraisal of what that journey looks like. And I think when you're trying to encourage other people along, having that full scope of the story, so not just the glory at the end, but the struggle as part of it, and seeing someone talk about that is a really important way of advocating the opportunities that are available. And we've got a customer, Bupa, who've been using StoryTagger to collect career stories, and they were originally going to spend 6 to 12 months sending their internal video team around the country interviewing female leaders to kind of amplify the success that female leaders were having within the organisation as part of a campaign they were running. So that's 6 to 12 months to capture these stories. They looked at StoryTagger and realised they could basically create an interview framework, distribute it to their female leaders across the country, and collect those stories within a matter of weeks rather than months or years at a fraction of the cost or the complexity that it would have taken to integrate or get their internal comms team to create that content. So career stories, it's a personal mission of mine to stop seeing text-based career stories and to have them all on video. I think it's so important to actually get that personal story when people are talking about their roles and how they've developed them. Reflective thinking. So this is it's been a challenge forever, and it still is. We know that reflection's really important. There's so much research continually coming out talking about how that reflective process is such an integral part of how we learn, but it's really challenging to embed within programs. And we've seen teams doing that in lots of different ways, but what we learned when we were going out making videos the old way, so we'd go out with a camera crew and we'd interview people, we realized that through that interview process, we were guiding people through that reflective process. So by having an understanding of what the learning talent team wanted to communicate, winding that into the individual's story and helping draw out that experience from the individual was guiding them through reflection. So one of the really important things that we had to build into StoryTagger was making sure that we could replicate that reflective guided structure within a self-service app. And it's actually one of the things that we probably put the most time into developing that part of the app. But when you look at it now, it's just so simple, you wouldn't actually think that very much effort went into it. But it's such an integral part of what the app does, and I think it's such an integral part of what the interviewer does when they're capturing that video content. So we had I don't know, was anyone at the session in T4 this morning about lessons learned? There's a couple of you. So we used StoryTagger in that session, and it was encouraging people like yourselves to share their fail stories from their kind of learning and development lives. And we created a story structure which enabled people to talk about where the sort of environment they were working in, what went wrong, what they learned from it, what they could share with others, and then wrapping up with just some key points of what they'd really like to share or do differently. And it's a great example of how that reflective process can be kind of built into a self-service environment. We've also got University of Hertfordshire, their primary science team are using StoryTagger to build a community of practice, and Bouygues Energy Services using it in a leadership development program, so the team are providing continuous feedback on how the program is running. It's a 9-month program, so they're using StoryTagger for that continuous development feedback. And kind of on the topic of that feedback, capturing impact evidence, it's you know, currently a lot of SurveyMonkey data is used to create infographics and spreadsheets, and we've got a lot of good data, and the data is great, but it doesn't really communicate the human story. And what we've seen is the nuances of that human story can be really important to actually understanding how that impact is kind of having an effect on an organization. And if you think about using the guided structure which I was talking about, you almost have this sort of silent facilitator guiding someone through the process of talking about the impact that a program or a learning intervention has had on how they work. And what we find is that when people have that structure, it makes it a lot easier for them to talk quite honestly about their experience. And also because they're using their phone, they're in a time, well, they've chosen a time that suits them, but also a place that they feel comfortable in. So you get a really honest personal appraisal talking about the impact. And we've been working with a research company, Aviatrix, who've been doing research around the Women's World Cup. So they've put StoryTagger in the living rooms of women who've never watched a football match before, and they did an impact piece on what their experience of was watching the World Cup matches for the first time, and that gave really interesting insight from a kind of space that you'd find very challenging to get into in a sort of structured interview environment on what their experiences of the World Cup were. We've also got the University of East Anglia doing student onboarding experiences. So as students come in through the first year, they're sharing structured stories about what that experience is like, which not only helps the university improve their onboarding, but gives them a wealth of content they can share with the next cohort to kind of give them some idea of what to expect when they join the university. Sharing knowledge. So I've been speaking to a few people this morning about, you know, overcoming the challenge of knowledge, walking out the door, enabling people to share that really detailed tactical knowledge from the field with their colleagues. And we know that a lot of learning takes place on the job. There's a lot of challenges with larger organizations, with silos, preventing that flow of knowledge moving across different teams and departments. So user-generated video is really quick to produce. It's really easy to get that technology into those hard-to-reach places. And so we've been allowing teams to capture quite detailed information from colleagues working in different environments which can be shared across different teams. So an example of this was with Tesco, where they were releasing a kind of a new strategy for how stores work and the customer experience. And it was kind of very different to how a lot of teams had been working. And there was one manager who was perfectly embodying this new way of working. And he created a video sharing a few tactical stories of what he was doing differently. And before it was even released, that video went viral amongst other store managers because it was such an understandable way for them to understand this quite weighty strategy document, as I say, in a very tactical way, saying if you do this, if you deal with customer situations like this, then this happens. And because it was one of their peers talking to them about real situations that they were dealing with on a daily basis, it was an incredibly powerful piece of content. So innovation, it has to be social. It's really important to understand the details of the problems you're trying to solve, how people are already trying to solve them, and when you're trying to implement that solution, kind of really nailing down the language that people are currently using so you can encourage them to adopt the new way of doing things. Again, user-generated video makes it really easy to discover and amplify a lot of the detail that goes on within an organization that can be quite difficult to pull out, and often within large organizations next to impossible to capture that information, those nuances and details from individuals working in the field. Also, bringing people into the innovation process makes them feel part of that story as well, which also helps any solutions that you're creating kind of land more efficiently, people adopting it having felt part of the story. interesting use of StoryTagger in this environment was one of our Italian customers reply. They were running a big innovation conference, and everybody split out into groups. You know, when you do the conference thing, you go into groups, you have one person with a flip chart writing down everything that we all say, and then when they present it back to the group, you kind of think, well, nobody really said that. But what they used in this situation, they used StoryTagger to create short structured videos from people within the group, and then when everyone got back together in the conference room, all the videos were played on the main screen, so everybody got to see those kind of macro innovation stories that were shared in the in the small groups. Everyone got involved with that. They actually ran an Oscars ceremony to award the best prize to the best idea that came out of those groups, and it was a really nice example of how in a closed environment those innovation collaborations can work, but that can scale out as well. Spreading good practice, and as I was saying before, a lot of face-to-face content just gets lost within that moment. There's so much great information that gets shared within our organizations in that face-to-face environment that just can't get amplified afterwards. And if you kind of think about how Amazon have taken advantage of what they call the long tail of their customer journey, where if I read book A, I can see what other people have read after that, and enables me to buy into it. And we can start doing the same thing by capturing some of these knowledge pieces and then threading that together so people can create a better idea outside of that single conversation, the sort of things that are being shared within an organization, and again really getting into the detail and the nuances of what is being shared in that face-to-face environment. And Verizon were using StoryTagger to support their sales enablement program, and they had a campaign running which was to drive more meetings for a specific technical product that they were selling. And it was a slightly different product they were going in with, so they needed to share knowledge from their top salespeople across their whole sales team very quickly to enable them to be able to go and speak to a CTO and sort of share the right messages to try and build up that trust, that relationship to book the meeting in. So they got their top salespeople to create these knowledge sharing frameworks of how to speak to a CTO, how to talk about specific benefits over features with different audiences. And they used that to distribute to their team. So they, as they were about to go into a meeting, they could just open up the app, look through different case studies that had been shared, war stories, tips, advice, find the information they needed, shared from peers, trusted sources, and then walk into that meeting with a bunch of quotes, frameworks that enabled them to confidently meet their own objectives. Developing leadership skills. So I touched on this earlier, and we know that people find the idea of making video uncomfortable. I mean, most of us haven't got millions of subscribers on our YouTube channels and make videos every day. And one of the things that we've found is the thing that makes video really hard is knowing what to say. Once you give people a structure, a framework of what to say, and allow them to record that video in a place that they feel comfortable in and at time that suits them, and you structure that reflective process, then actually making video isn't quite as scary as you think it is. And for leaders, leaders need to be put out of their comfort zones. They need to be able to work in those sort of environments. They also need to be practicing and rehearsing how they're presenting as well. So creating this sort of content is not only a great way of sharing what those individuals are learning, but it's also helping leaders get better by rehearsing, watching themselves, and practicing how they present. And again, customers like Hemsley Fraser, Oxford Group, Legal & General are all using this on premium leadership courses to kind of not only, as I was mentioning earlier, embed that reflective learning transfer piece into programs, but to kind of really nudge their people, their leaders, into looking at how they're presenting, looking at how they're talking, making them think about how efficient they're being with words, how they share those value pieces as effectively as possible. And lastly, feeding your LXP or learning management system or social learning space with brightly coloured biscuits. So, you know, you might have Workplace, you might have Fuse, you might have Degreed, and your audience are consuming content at a voracious pace, which is awesome. But, you know, you've probably heard of like YouTuber burnout, where, you know, if you're not making 3 videos every day, you lose 100,000 million subscribers within the space of a few hours. We're kind of reaching similar points, or we soon will be in L&D as well, because whilst, you know, it takes up, you could take 2, 3, 4 weeks, months to create a piece of video content, our audiences are consuming it within minutes. And we're at a similar sort of stage to that publishers experienced when we were in Web 1.0, where a lot of the publishers realized they couldn't really find a business model to support the amount of content creation that was required to keep their audiences engaged. And Web 2.0 was all about democratizing content production, so their audiences would create the content that they distributed that would keep them retained and engaged on their channels. And this is where user-generated video really is finding a home within modern learning environments. It's enabling teams to be a lot more agile about the creation of video. It's massively reducing the cost of creating video. And it's enabling teams to put video into scenarios where video could never get into before. So the scope and range of where you can capture this content, where video can really dial down into the detail of how people are learning and the experiences they're having. So you can personalize the content that are people viewing through the you know, the LXPs and the social learning spaces. And we've I'm not sure we've mentioned this before, but we've just started working with Filtered, and as you know, Filtered, huge amount of data, and we were chatting to them, and what they realized was they were finding gaps, content gaps in sort of learning materials that were out there, and there was big gaps. So a lot of people searching for stuff, but there was no content to fill those gaps. So what we're doing with StoryTagger is we're being able to be very agile, creating frameworks to send out to subject matter experts to quickly fill those content gaps where we know there's an audience, and being able to test how user-generated content can satisfy the need of all the people who are searching for that content. So I think that you'll see more of the Filtered partnership coming through in the coming months, but it's going to be a really interesting one to sort of see and evidence and prove the agility of this style of creating content for meeting the gaps that the data is evidencing within your learning environment. So, well, I hope that's given you some food for thought. It's a quick pitch for StoryTagger. LinkedIn's the place to follow us. We share lots of really useful stuff on LinkedIn, and all the partnerships that we do, resources and stuff go out on LinkedIn. You'll find me on there. If you'd like to just have a chat, you can book my calendar and get a Zoom call on Calendly. So I'd love to hear from you. If you want to talk about just how you're using video, if you've got questions about video, if you're interested in running a pilot, anything, just hook up with me and leave a message saying, I saw you at Learning Technology Summer Forum. And if you'd like to try StoryTagger, we've got a demo that's on the site, so you can download the app free from the web store. There's a code which you can get sent to you on email through the website, and you can have a go. And that takes you through the process of reflecting on what you've learned this year. So a great opportunity to share what you've learned today. And also reflect on what you think, or where you think this kind of technology could support your team, and that becomes a piece of collateral that you can share with your organization and you know, sort of spread the word of user-generated video. So I think I've got a couple of minutes left. I'd love to, if anyone's got any questions, I'd love to try and answer them. Has anyone? Excellent, thank you. Let's pass this over.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about moderation in video, particularly where users are talking about technical subjects. I think it was raised by the question at the start. How do you control that?
Sure, excellent. That's a great question. And moderation is one of the big challenges of user-generated content. What we do, and I kind of touched on this when we were talking about the guided reflection, the user-generated content that StoryTagger creates is on Rails. So you basically give people an interview framework. So you create their narrative arc. So you have your beginning, middle, and end. And within those key points, you give them a selection of things that they can talk about. So you're very much curating the content that they create. So people, they won't go off on flights of fancy or to start talking about their pets because you haven't necessarily given them the scope or permission to talk about that. But they do have the autonomy to drill into the detail of something that aligns to their own experience within the framework that you provided. And also, videos are moderated by administrators, so nothing goes out without that being signed off by an administrator. Anyone else want to share anything or ask any questions? Okay, thanks so much for coming along today. Really appreciate your time. Have a fantastic rest of the day. It's kind of lunchtime now, so there'll be beat the queues to the lunch stalls. And yeah, we've got stand 19 just down at the front of the hall down there. Do come along, say hi. I'd be really happy just to chat about, go into a bit more detail on case studies or any other questions that you might have. Oh, and also, I did see a few of you taking pictures, but we have got a list of everything here as well. So come grab one of these flyers and you've got a list of all the things I was talking about. Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate your time. Cheers.